Welcome back to Plato's Republic. We are in the middle of Book 2. So if you remember from the last episode, we had 3 different speeches, essentially. 2 of the characters, I think, are basically the same character. So we start out with Glaucon, who picked up the thread from Thrasymachus. So you remember Book 1, Thrasymachus laid out his argument that justice is the advantage of the stronger. Socrates kind of refutes it. Thrasymachus' heart doesn't really seem to be in it when he's going along with Socrates. And so Glaucon, a.k.a. Donnie, is not satisfied. And he steps up and he says, here's the speech I think that Thrasymachus should have made in defense of injustice. And he makes a pretty compelling argument that if you are just, but people think that you're unjust, then you're going to be miserable. Because you don't get the advantages of being unjust, like cheating on your taxes. And then you also get put in prison wrongly, have your name dragged through the mud. And he had some kind of graphic descriptions of like being tortured. And he said it's much better to be unjust but perceived as being just. And that way, yeah, you get kind of the best of both worlds. Everybody loves you, and you're cheating on your taxes or doing whatever. He tells a very compelling story, or visually compelling story, about this magic ring from Lydia of Gyges, which I guess he stole from The Hobbit. And he says that he tells a story about this guy who finds this ring, and when he turns it a certain way, he's invisible, and he turns it back, and then he is visible again. And he says that anybody who wore this would just decide to be unjust, because they could go and sleep with the king's wife and get away with murder. And he said that kind of without the actual consequences of injustice, everybody would choose injustice, because that's just human nature. So it's a fairly profound point about human nature. Whether that's evidence or not, it's kind of up to the reader to decide. But it's very memorable. And so Glaucon finishes off his speech saying, "Look, it clearly looks like it's much better to be unjust than just, given these circumstances," and the political aspect, again, sort of seeps into this. So he says that Socrates says, well, this stuff will come out. You can't get away with everything, with murder. He says, well, actually, if you have secret societies and political clubs and you're well-trained in the persuasive arts, yeah, you probably could get away with a lot of this stuff. And so that, for me, was very fascinating, because, again, we keep talking about justice at the individual level versus the political level. And in this case, they're kind of tied together, in that you can get away with being kind of unjust at the individual level if you have a secret cabal that has kind of subverted the law. This actually was a big concern in the 19th century in the United States. There was actually, I think it was an anti-Masonic league of people who were so mad about the Freemasons. So the Freemasons was a secret society. There was some, I think, murder case in upstate New York, and people thought the fix was in, because, the accused was a Freemason, and the judge was a Freemason, and the guy got off. And so people were just up in arms about this stuff, thinking that the secret society had subverted true justice. And it's not really something you hear a lot about anymore. I don't know if it's because there are, fewer secret societies. I thought maybe there were, but then I found out 2 of my best friends in college were in a secret society, and they didn't tell me about it, and I'm still a little mad about it. But that's okay. I'll get over it in 20 years. So I think, they are out there. Are they subverting justice? Are they allowing unjust people to get away with murder? I don't know. But maybe. They've been at least thinking about this since Greek times, and unless you're kind of monitoring all communications between all people, you'll never really know if people are having, their secret handshakes and club meetings without you and plotting murders. So, then after Glaucon's speech comes Adeimantus' speech. Adeimantus is the brother of Glaucon, and he takes the argument a step further. So his speech is kind of interesting because he starts quoting Homer and a couple of other poets who argue that injustice is a lot easier than justice. It's just kind of the path of least resistance. And so kind of another argument that anybody will do this if they're given the opportunity, and that the weak simply oppose injustice because they're not capable of doing it themselves. And he adds another twist to the argument, saying that he brings the gods back into it, but kind of on his side. So he says, look, we got all these poets, these begging priests, these lawgivers telling us about the gods, and how we shouldn't do unjust things because it will upset them. But according to all these people, the gods can be bribed. So like the gods are venal. And so it seems like the smartest strategy would be do injustice, make a lot of like extra money that way, and then send some of it to the god, like pay off the gods. They're like your mafia boss. And so he says that's kind of the nail in the coffin for the argument in favor of justice, is that even if you bring the gods into it, if you kind of do the math, get the spreadsheet out, injustice is looking pretty compelling. So Socrates says that these are compelling speeches, and he's not sure how he's going to respond, and so he kind of begins in this roundabout way, talking about justice, because they were talking about kind of justice at the individual level, except for these political clubs. Socrates says, well, let's step back a bit. And he makes this comparison to trying to read small letters. He says maybe if there are larger letters, you should try to read those first and then compare them to the smaller letters. And so let's try to look at justice at the city level and then work our way toward the individual level. So that is the path that Socrates is on. He starts this speech talking about the first city, or how a city would be founded. And it is kind of this state of nature scenario where 4 or 5 people, it's almost like Robert Nozick, they just get together and decide that, okay, we 5 people are better off forming a small city, and you're the shoemaker, and you're the farmer, and you're the butcher, etc. And we'll have like our little 5-man city, just five guys doing their thing out on the Greek countryside. And then he says, well, he builds his argument saying, well, once you got those 5, then aren't you going to need a couple more to do this? And then aren't you eventually going to need merchants? You're going to need retailers. And then eventually, so he keeps like building up the city like it's SimCity 2000. And eventually he argues that you're going to have luxury, and people are going to need luxury. And that's almost like the loss of innocence of this little city, is when people start wanting luxurious things. They want olives and pastries and prostitutes was the phrase that stuck in my mind. And as a result, he says, and this is where it gets completely fascinating. This is where I cut it off last time. This is why cities go to war, is because they want to protect their luxuries. Because you see some other city, they're just getting by on their necessities, but cities just kind of necessarily expand until they're fighting one another. And so that's sort of the larger state of nature, I guess, that's happening here. So even if you have kind of like an internally consistent and just society, eventually they're just going to start bumping up against other cities and having to go to war, which I was blown away by. But no, I think there is a lot of relevance to today of like why countries actually go to war. They say it's because it's out of kind of survival or necessity, but often it's because they want some natural resources or something that's not strictly necessary for the country's survival. So we are going to resume the argument, and we just talked about why they went to war. I'm going to kind of reread a passage because I think I got a little hurried at the end last time. and then see where Socrates goes with this. So after he's constructed the city from nothing, we're going to see how this relates back to individual justice, I hope. So here's Socrates. Now let's not say yet whether the effects of war are good or bad, but only that we have now found the origin of war. It comes from those same factors, the occurrence of which is the source of the greatest evils for cities and the individuals in them. Okay, so he's talking about luxuries as being the source of these great evils. Glaucon. Indeed it does. Socrates. The city must be further enlarged then, my dear Glaucon, and not just a little, but by the size of a whole army. We'll do battle with the invaders in defense of the city's wealth, and of all the other things which we just described. Glaucon. Why so? Aren't the inhabitants themselves adequate for that purpose? We get a specialized military force, I guess for the first time. Socrates. No, not at any rate. If the agreement that you and the rest of us made when we were founding the city was a good one. I think we agreed, if you remember, that it is impossible for a single person to practice many crafts well. Glaucon. True, we did say that. Socrates. Well then, don't you think that warfare is a craft? It is, indeed. So, should we be more concerned about the craft of shoemaking than the craft of warfare? Not at all. Well now, we prevented a shoemaker from trying to be a farmer, weaver, or builder at the same time, instead of just a shoemaker, in order to ensure that the shoemaker's job was done well. They just love a job well done. Similarly, we also assigned just the one job for which he had a natural aptitude to each of the other people, and said that he was to work at it his whole life, free from having to do any of the other jobs, so as not to miss the opportune moments for performing it well. But isn't it of the greatest importance that warfare be carried out well? Or is fighting a war so easy that a farmer, a shoemaker, or any other artisan can be a soldier at the same time, even though no one can become so much as a good checkers player or dice player if he considers it only as a sideline and does not practice it from childhood? Okay, so this kind of explains why he was a little obsessed about the division of labor at the beginning. I think, if I see where this argument's going. Can someone just pick up a shield or any other weapon or instrument of war and immediately become a competent fighter in an infantry battle, or whatever other sort of battle it may be, even though no other tool makes someone who picks it up a craftsman or an athlete, or is even of any service to him unless he has acquired knowledge of it and has had sufficient practice? Glaucon. If tools could do that, they would be valuable indeed. Yeah, I love it. I don't know, any kind of tool you pick up and you're just suddenly like an expert chair maker. Then to the degree that the guardian's job is of greatest importance, I think this is the first appearance of the word guardian, is when talking about the soldiers here. And that I know for a fact that's going to come up, because that's very famous. It requires that the most freedom from other things, as well as the greatest craft and practice. Glaucon. I should think so. Doesn't it also require a person whose nature is suited to that very practice? Certainly. Then our task, it seems, is to select, if we can, which sorts of natures suit people to guard the city. So this is, I don't really know. Okay, so he's kind of constructing this ideal city from nothing. And then he's suddenly, like, at first he was just saying what would naturally occur. Like, oh yeah, the shoemaker would just do this, and then, oh, we just get retailers out of nowhere. And now, this is more, I feel like it's just taken a turn here, where this is more prescription, because this is not necessarily what would just rise up naturally. Okay. And all right. Well, we'll see where it's going. The idea of the origin is interesting here, and it keeps coming up in political philosophy, like Locke and Hobbes and Rousseau. They're all obsessed with the state of nature and kind of the origin of society. In some sense, it doesn't really matter what the origin was hundreds of years ago. that's all just, in some sense, it's just kind of this myth that we have, and it doesn't really matter how we got to where we are. We just have the social relations that we do today, and it seems like that justice should be judged on its own merits. But this might be kind of the origin of judging a society's justice based on the origin of that society, rather than the kind of the present state of things. Okay, Glaucon. Yes, that is our task. Socrates. By Zeus, it is no trivial task that we have taken on, then. At the same time, we must not shrink from it, but do the best we can. Glaucon. No, we must not. Oh, we must not shrink from it. No, we must not do the best we can. Do you think there's any difference, when it comes to the job of guarding, between the nature of a noble hound and that of a well-bred youth? What do you mean? I mean that both of them have to be sharp-eyed, quick to catch what they see, and strong, too, in case they have to fight what they capture. Yes, they need all these things. And they must be courageous, surely, if indeed they are to fight well. Of course. Now, will a horse, a dog, or any other animal be courageous if it is not spirited? Or haven't you noticed just how invincible and unbeatable spirit is, so that its presence makes the whole soul fearless and unconquerable in any situation? Yes, confidence. I have noticed that. Then it is clear what physical qualities the guardians should have. Yes. And as far as their souls are concerned, they must, at any rate, be spirited. That too. But with natures like that, Glaucon, how will they avoid behaving like savages to one another and to the other citizens? Okay, so they're strong, sharp-eyed, and spirited. We gotta know that they're not just gonna be a terror. By Zeus, it won't be easy for them. But surely they must be gentle to their own people and harsh to their enemies. Otherwise, they will not wait around for others to destroy them, but will do it themselves first. Yeah, I gotta have the initiative, I guess. So yeah, it's interesting. I'm just trying to think about whether this is sort of constructing this ideal society, but is it? I guess one question is it possible? And I think that's one of the core questions of the Republic. Is it going to have a list of requirements so long and absurd that you realize justice in this world is just not attainable, and we should just kind of just give it up and just say, look, it's always going to be horrible and corrupt. Life is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, etc. All right, we'll see where he's going here. So Glaucon says that's true. Socrates, what are we to do then? Where are we to find a character that is both gentle and high-spirited at the same time? For, of course, a gentle nature is the opposite of the spirited kind. Gotta be spirited and gentle. Confident and calm. Glaucon, apparently. But surely if someone lacks either of these qualities, he cannot be a good guardian. Yet the combination of them seems to be impossible. So it follows, then, that a good guardian is impossible. Dun-dun-dun. Okay. And that's purely based on this psychological argument. It's like, yeah, someone who's spirited and harsh isn't going to be gentle at home. Sounds like the ideal man. Impossible to find. Okay, we'll keep going with it and see where this argument is leading. I am afraid so. So this is Socrates' narration. I could not see a way out, and on re-examining what had gone before, I said, "We deserve to be stuck, my dear Glaucon, for we've lost track of the analogy we put forward." It's like, yeah, this is too convoluted even for Socrates to keep track of. How do you mean? We have overlooked the fact that there are natures of the sort we thought impossible, ones that include these opposite qualities. Where are you going to find them, Socrates? Where? You can see the combination in other animals too, but especially in the one to which we compared the guardian. For you know, of course, that noble hounds naturally have a character of that sort. They are as gentle as can be to those they are familiar with and know, but the opposite to those they do not know. Yes, I do know that. So the combination we want is possible, at least in a dog. After all, and what we are seeking in a good guardian is not contrary to nature. Wow, really got yourself out of that bind. You're like, oh yeah, you can never find these two qualities in a person, but you can find them in a dog. No, I suppose not. Now, don't you think that our future guardian, besides being spirited, must also be by nature philosophical? And these guardians, they're just the soldiers who are going out to kill, I guess. They can't, I don't know, they're not just, there's no, like, separation of powers here, right? Because normally you got, like, the legislative and then the executive, and you kind of hope, it's like, alright, like, the army just takes orders from the elected representative here. Like, the army doesn't need to be philosophical. They really just need to be spirited. Okay. Glaucon, how do you mean? I don't understand. Yeah, me neither. It too is something you see in dogs, and should make us wonder at the merit of the beast. In what way? In that, when a dog sees someone it does not know, it gets angry even before anything bad happens to it. But, when it knows someone, it welcomes him, even if it has never received anything good from him. Have you never wondered at that? It has a lot of bearing on political philosophy. Dog behavior. I've never paid it any mind until now, but it is clear that a dog does do that sort of thing. Well, that seems to be a naturally refined quality, and one that is truly philosophical. My philosophical dog. In what way? And that it judges anything it sees to be either a friend or an enemy on no other basis than that it knows the one and does not know the other. And how could it be anything besides a lover of learning if it defines what is its own and what is alien to it in terms of knowledge and ignorance? Oh, this is such a weird argument. Okay, so he's saying, like, if he recognizes you, he's not going to bite your hand off, and if he doesn't, then he will. And it's because he's a lover of learning, according to Socrates, which I find to be a bit of a stretch. And here's Glaucon. It surely could not be anything but. Give me a break, Glaucon, come on. Or Adeimantus, butt in here. Now's your chance. But surely the love of learning and philosophy are the same, aren't they? Are they? I don't know. Yes, they are the same. Then can't we confidently assume that the same holds for a human being too? That if he's going to be gentle to his own and those he knows, he must be, by nature, a lover of learning and a philosopher. Nah, I don't think so. I don't agree with that. I think you can have a tough guy with a soft heart and who doesn't care about philosophy. We can. And see, okay, this is interesting because this is like kind of puffing up the role of philosophy and kind of making like, it's sort of philosophy making philosophy necessary, right? Like, if philosophy just said, well, actually, you don't really need us for anything, then people would be like, well, okay, nice knowing you. So this is kind of Socrates, I don't know, making himself the center not only of this conversation, which he's been doing since the beginning of this book, but also the center of this, like having the skill most indispensable to this society. Like, well, what do you know? You need us after all. Glaucon, we can. Socrates. Philosophy, then, in spirit, speed, and strength as well, must all be combined in the nature of anyone who's going to be a really fine and good guardian of our city. Yeah, it's like those are all the attributes on like the role-playing game card. Philosophy, spirit, velocity 10 out of 10, spirit 10, speed 10, strength 11. Glaucon, absolutely. Socrates, and that is what we'd like to have to be. That is what he would have to be like at the outset. But how are we to bring these people up and educate them? Will inquiring into that topic bring us any closer to the goal of our inquiry, which is to discover the origins of justice and injustice in a city? We want our account to be adequate, but we do not want it to be any longer than necessary. This whole thing seems longer than necessary. Okay, one of the other things I was thinking about with this whole construct that Socrates has, so I said in the first book, there seems to be a lot about persuasion as distinct from reason. And one of the classic sales techniques is like, you get people saying yes, and so they're like, yes, 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 and then it's like harder for someone to say no after they've said yes 20 times. And this is exactly what Socrates seems to be doing, is because he's builds up the city like bit by bit. So he's like, oh, and then you need a shoemaker. Oh, then you need a shepherd, do you not? Oh, certainly, Socrates. And then you're going to need this person, do you not? Why, yes, Socrates. So he's got the string of yeses here with Glaucon, and then Glaucon kind of agrees to the stupid stuff, like you need the guardian to be like for someone to be spirited and tender, they have to be a philosopher. So I think, I don't know, I think this is much about psychology as philosophy. True philosophy. And here's Adeimantus again. And Glaucon's brother replied, I, for one, certainly expect that this inquiry will help us. Socrates, by Zeus! In that case, my dear Adeimantus, we must not abandon it, even if it turns out to be a somewhat lengthy affair. Yeah, hang on, he's saying. Don't give up on me yet. No, we must not. Come on, then. And like people in a fable telling stories at their leisure, let's enter discussion and educate these men. Yes, let's. What then will the education be, says Socrates? Or is it difficult to find a better one? So is this I guess it's educating the guardians. All right. Or is it difficult to find a better one than the one that has been discovered over a long period of time? Physical training for bodies and musical training for the soul? Yes, it is. Now, won't we start musical training before physical training? Of course. And you include stories under musical training, don't you? I do. Yeah, every musical lesson should include stories. But aren't there two kinds of stories, one true and the other false? Or lest they seem true or seem false. Yes. And education must make use of both, but first of the false ones? I do not understand what you mean. Alright, so we got both fiction and non-fiction on our shelves here. Don't you understand that we first begin by telling stories to children? And surely they were false on the whole, though they have some truth in them. This is smart stuff. And we use stories on children before physical training. That's true. That, then, is what I meant by saying that musical training should be taken up before physical training. Yeah, how could you not know that? He said, learn piano before you lift weights. Obviously, it means we teach kids about Santa Claus first. And you are right. Now, you know, don't you, that the beginning of any job is of greatest importance, especially when we are dealing with anything young and tender. For that is when it is especially malleable and best takes on whatever pattern one wishes to impress on it. Yeah, okay, alright, I'll go along with that. Precisely so. Shall we carelessly allow our children to hear any old stories made up by just anyone? Yes, that's what the internet is for. Then, and to take beliefs into their souls that are, for the most part, the opposite of the ones we think they should hold when they are grown up? We certainly won't allow that at all. Uh-oh. I think I see where this is going. What's sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander. Maybe the adults need to hear stories as well. So our first task, it seems, is to supervise the storytellers. If they make up a good story, we must accept it. If not, we must reject it. Yeah, they're like the producers at Netflix. We will persuade nurses and mothers to tell the acceptable ones to their children, and to spend far more time shaping their souls with these stories than they do shaping their bodies by handling them. Many of the stories they tell now, however, must be thrown out. I agree. Which sorts? In the more significant stories, we will see the less significant ones as well. For surely the more significant ones and the less significant ones both follow the same pattern and have the same effects. Don't you think so? Okay, so he's starting... Alright, well, I don't know what he's talking about with more and less significant stories. Indeed I do, but I do not at all... Okay, yeah, here's Adiamantus on my side. I do not understand at all what more significant ones you mean. The ones Homer, Hesiod, and other poets tell us. After all, they surely composed false stories which they told and are still telling to people. Darn you, Homer. Which stories do you mean, and what is the fault you find in them? The first and greatest fault that no one ought to find, especially if the falsehood has no good features. What? Yeah, yes, but what is it? Using a story to create a bad image of what the gods and heroes are like, just as a painter might paint a picture that is not at all like the things he's trying to paint. Yeah, why would you do that? Picasso? Yes, you are right to find fault with that. But what cases in particular, what sorts of cases do you mean? Okay, now we're getting into it. What are the myths that we need to be telling the children? First, the greatest falsehood about the greatest things has no good features. I mean, Hesiod, telling us about how Uranus behaved, how Cronus punished him for it, and how he was in turn punished by his own son. But even if these stories were true, they should be passed over in silence, I would think, and not told so casually to the foolish and young. And if for some reason they must be told, only a very few people should hear them. People who are pledged to secrecy, and have had to sacrifice not just a pig, but something so great and scarce that the number of people who hear them is kept as small as possible. Very interesting. Yeah, it's... Okay, so you have these secret stories, and you have to sacrifice a lot to hear the secret stories. This sounds like a good cult. Like, if you're going to build a cult, this is the way to do it. You have some secret stories, and then in order to hear the secret story, you got to, pay through the nose, or you got to sacrifice something huge. Okay, so the truth... Okay, and that's saying, assuming these stories are true. And we need to tell them. We gotta keep it just for the very few. Yes, those stories are certainly troubling. And they should not be told in our city, Adiamantus. No young person should hear it said that if he were to commit the worst crimes, he would be doing nothing amazing, or that if he were to inflict every sort of punishment on an unjust father, he would only be doing the same as the first and greatest of the gods. Ah, yeah, can't have the children rebelling against their parents, even if they're unjust. Very interesting. What are the political implications of that? No, by Zeus, I do not think myself that these stories are fit to be told. Indeed, we must not allow any stories about gods warring, fighting, or plotting against one another if we want the guardians of our city to think that it is shameful to be easily provoked into mutual hatred. Okay, so we do want the guardians to think it's shameful to be easily provoked. So if we have stories about these gods being provoked, then they're like, well, I was easily provoked, but so was Neptune, so why are you mad at me? After all, those stories are not true either. Still less should battles between gods and giants, or the many other multifarious hostilities of gods and heroes toward their families and friends, occur in the stories the guardians hear, or in the embroidered pictures they see. This is like the embroidered picture. I love the idea of like a secret Netflix for the elites. It's like, okay, now you're ready. These are like the deleted episodes that were too dangerous for the people. Okay. On the contrary... Oh no, sorry, I misinterpreted that. So there are some stories that should be completely banned. Yeah, okay. So in addition to Secret Netflix, which we had before, there are some stories that just not even the Guardian should hear. On the contrary, if we are somehow going to persuade our people that no citizen has ever hated another, and that it is impious to do so, then those are the things their male and female elders should tell them from childhood on. I like this bit about what you're telling the youth, because previously it was Adeimantus who was all mad. He was like, Socrates, you and all you old people have been telling us about how great being just is, but you've only told us about, like, all the cool prizes you get, and, like, I don't know, you go on, like, the speaking circuit, and you, like, win a Nobel Prize. But you haven't been telling us about why justice is good in itself. You've only been telling us about kind of the external emoluments. And so Adeimantus was mad at Socrates for the things that the elders had told him as a youth. And now Socrates is, I don't know if he's mad, but he's just saying, okay, this is what the elders need to teach the young people. I wonder if Plato's mad that he was told some lies as a kid. And the poets they listen to as they grow older should be compelled to tell them the same sort of thing. Stories about Hera being chained by her son, on the other hand, or about Hephaestus being hurled from heaven by his father when he tried to save his mother from a beating, or about the battle of the gods in Homer, should not be admitted into our city, either as allegories or non-allegories. Just no free speech here. For the young cannot distinguish what is allegorical from what is not. And the beliefs they absorb are, at that age, are difficult to erase and tend to become unalterable. Very interesting. Yeah, I mean, this is kind of how society-wide, I don't know, propaganda works, is like, we just have all these stories you tell the youth, and kind of the parents are too exhausted to actually regulate what stories the kids are hearing, so they all hear the same thing and believe the same things. For these reasons, then, we should probably take the utmost care to ensure that the first stories they hear are about virtue, and the best ones for them to hear. That sounds reasonable. Just abolishing free speech. Got a censor committee for the stories that are to be told. Yes, that makes sense. But if at this point, too, someone were once again to ask us what stories these are, how should we reply? Socrates: You and I are not poets at present, Adeimantus, but we are founding a city. And it is appropriate for the founders to know the patterns on which the poets must base their stories, and from which they must not deviate. But they should not themselves make up any poems. Okay, so this is like the censorship committee. They're like, okay, we're not actually poets here. Don't expect us to do iambic pentameter, but we know, here are the approved stories you can write about. That's right. But what precisely are the patterns that stories about gods must follow? That's a good question. Something like this. Whether in epic, lyric, or tragedy, a god must always be represented as he is. What? Okay, and this... So Adeimantus says yes, he must, but Adeimantus previously, like his whole point about his previous speech was that it pays to be unjust because we don't know the true nature of the gods. The only source of information we have are the poets and the lawgivers, who... we don't know whether we can trust those guys. And now he's saying, well, we're telling the poets what to do. So there's no way... I don't see how Adeimantus can agree with this, because he already said we don't know the nature of the gods. So how are we going to represent the god as he is? We have no idea what their nature is except through the poets. Like, it's just this circular thing. So I don't know. I don't think Adeimantus would agree with that. Now, Gods, of course, are really good, aren't they? It must be described as such. I'm going to look at this note on 24. It's probably just going to be see glossary of terms. But I'll roll the dice. Ho Theos. Literally, the god. But the definite article is almost certainly functioning as a universal quantifier, as in the swallow is a migratory bird, which means all swallows migrate. Okay. Another time I wish I knew Greek. Okay, so the god is really good. And must be described as such. Okay. Yeah, even though all these previous ones were it's like describing the gods as hating each other, accepting bribes, etc. Adimantus, come on now. He's like in a trance. He'll just agree to anything Socrates says. And surely nothing good is harmful, is it? I suppose not. Socrates, well, what is not harmful do any harm? No, never. And can what does no harm do anything bad? No, it can't do that either. But what does nothing bad could not be the cause of anything bad, could it? But what does nothing bad, or i.e. that which does nothing bad, could not be the cause of anything bad, could it? No, it could not. What about what is good? Is it beneficial? Yes. So, it is the cause of doing well. Yes. What is good is not the cause of all things, then. Instead, it is the cause of things that are good, while of bad ones, it is not the cause. Exactly. That's what I've been talking about this whole time. So, and again, this, I don't know. I'm just thinking about, before we kind of talked about things in themselves versus their consequences, and then things being an error. So, like, something good could still make a mistake. Or, the gods could make mistakes, I think. So we'll see where he goes. Adiamantus is not pushing back on this at all. So, since gods are good, they are not, as the masses claim, the cause of everything. Instead, they are a cause of only a few things that happen to human beings, while of most they are not the cause. For good things are fewer than bad ones in our lives. Yeah. Sounds like spoken like a Russian. Of the good things, they alone are the cause, but we must find some other cause for the bad ones, not the gods. That's absolutely true in my view. Adiamantus. I'm so disappointed in this guy. Unless, of course... So here's the other possible interpretation of what's going on here. So Socrates sort of set this whole thing up, saying we need to lie to our children, whether or not it's true, or whether or not it makes any sense. Kids don't know the difference between allegory and non-allegory. We're just going to make stuff up. So this could be the part where Socrates is just making things up for people to believe. So this could be kind of the transition from being kind of the city planner to like, oh wait, actually you're in the Matrix, and I'm going to tell you some lies right now, and just to make everybody get along or establish my place of importance in the society. Because I don't see Adiamantus legitimately agreeing with this line of reasoning. Just making up stuff about the gods. The other thing that's interesting, I was just thinking more about that footnote, is I could see... I don't know the specifics of this passage, but I could see that being latched onto by like Neoplatonists or medieval scholasticists, where he says that this is rendered as the god. So I could see the translator being like, oh, he's talking about God. God is always good. Like Plato said so. And then this translator says, no, he's using it as this universal qualifier, like as in the Swift. So a little side note. All right, so Adimantus says, that's absolutely true in my view. The gods cause the good things. We don't know what causes the bad things. How could it be any other way? Socrates, then we won't accept from Homer, or from anyone, the foolish mistake he makes about the gods when he says, there are two urns at the threshold of Zeus, one filled with good fates, the other with bad ones. And the person to whom Zeus gives a mixture of these sometimes meets with a bad fate, sometimes with a good one. Again, okay, this is why Adimantus, he's like, the poets are the only source of information we have, and then goes along with this thing from Socrates about the gods, sort of based on the poets, and now he's refuting the poet. So this completely contradicts what Adimantus said, which was, we have to, if we accept the poet's account of the gods, we have to accept it wholesale. Like, we can't just cherry pick the parts that we like or dislike. So I'll be kind of curious in Adimantus' response here, because it's a contradiction on his part. Okay, so Socrates continues, but the one who receives his fate entirely from the second urn, evil famine drives over the divine earth. Nor will we tolerate the saying that Zeus is the dispenser of both good and bad to mortals. As for the breaking of the oath, and the truths by Pandarus, if anyone tells us that it was brought about by Athena and Zeus, or that Themis and Zeus were responsible for strife and contention among the gods, we won't praise him. I could see why the scholastics must have loved Plato. They're like, yeah, that's right, God isn't doing the bad stuff. That's somebody else. Nor will we allow the young to hear the words of Aeschylus. A god makes mortals guilty when he wants to destroy a house utterly. And if anyone composes a poem, such as the one those lines are from, about the sufferings of Niobe, or about the house of Pelops, or the tale of Troy, or anything else of that sort, he should be required to say these things are not the works of a god. You see, he's not talking about a poem. No, okay, so he's talking about you got to say the sufferings of Niobe or the fall of Troy. That's not the gods doing. Or, if they are the works of a god, then the poet must look for roughly the sort of account of them we are now seeking. He must say that the actions of the gods are good and just, and that the people they punish are benefited by them. Yeah, thanks, God, said Job. We won't allow him to say that those who are punished are made wretched, and that it was a god who made them so. But we will allow him to say that bad people are wretched because they are in need of punishment, and that in paying the penalty they are benefited by that god. But as for saying that a god, who is himself good, is the cause of evils, we will fight that in every way. We won't allow anyone to say it in his own city, if it is to be well governed, or anyone to hear it either, whether young or old, whether with meter or without meter. I guess in poetically or not poetically. For these stories are impious, disadvantageous to us, and not in concord with one another. Okay, so alright, a couple things here. This last little bit about being impious is interesting, because this sort of started out as a philosophical investigation. And I mentioned before sort of this tension between piety and philosophy, maybe as represented by Cephalus, or certain scholars have said Cephalus represents piety, and Socrates represents philosophy, and now Socrates is kind of coming down on the side of piety. But, again, is this just a story he's telling for children? Is he treating Adimantus as a child? Adimantus is, I'm guessing he's a lot younger than Socrates. Because he's the brother of Glaucon, but I don't really know. I don't know if there's been a mention of like Glaucon's age. And so we also have the reason this would make sense as a myth for governing a city is that people tend to conflate the gods with their rulers, right? So you just it's like, I don't know, when I was a little kid, I always thought of like the pastor at my church. I don't know, when I'm like 6 years old, like that was my picture of God, was that like a much bigger version of that guy. And it was just stuck in my head from an early age, and you just kind of conflate the concepts in your head, you know. It's like, oh yeah, well, time to go confess to this man, sort of like confessing to God, but he's listening to everybody's confessions in the community. So, yeah, so I could see this. These are all the useful things you want people to believe about their leaders. Like, oh, I'm the cause of everything good that happens. I'm not the cause of anything bad that happens, and I'm punishing you for your own good. Like, that's basically how you keep the society together. If everybody believes that, then you have a stable society because nobody questions the authority, and it's just all kind of rationalized, and you get the logical mechanisms in place with the story about the god, and then people sort of apply it to the leadership as well. And this is basically the construct that we've had throughout the whole book, is you develop an argument for one thing and then you apply it to something else. Whether it's about like the ship's captain and the doctor, or the city and the individual, he says, okay, let's just like develop this one, and then oops, that also seems to apply here. Just like setting up the shapes in your head. Okay, so let's see what Adeimantus says. Adeimantus, here it is. Here's the key moment. Is he going to agree with this thing that he disagreed with before without really having a good reason? He says, I like your law, and I will vote with you for it. It's interesting. So this isn't... It's not saying that this is true. It's just that he likes it, and he'll vote for it. So, again, this is different from like, oh, you are correct. This is a mathematical proof. I'm convinced of the mathematical proof. It's just like, yeah, I'd vote for that. I'd join your team. Same thing with Polemarchus in Book 1. Socrates is like, will you fight with me? He's like, yeah, I'll fight with you. Okay, again, it is kind of like some tribalism. It's almost like they're forming a secret society or political club now that Socrates has Adeimantus. Like, he's got that vote in the bag, and he's got Polemarchus on his side. Yeah, he's doing some log rolling. Okay. Socrates. This, then, will be one of the laws or patterns relating to gods that speakers and poets will have to follow. That gods are not the cause of all things, but only of good ones. Yeah, that's like Richard J. Daley, like the mayor of Chicago in the 60s. He had a rule on like the floor of city council. Someone would start criticizing a previous mayor, and he'd just be like, objection, we do not criticize previous mayors. And again, it's just like... You get that pattern established, because it's like, okay, the best way to avoid criticizing him is prevent people from criticizing his predecessors. We do not do that. Adeimantus. An entirely satisfactory one it is. Socrates. Now, what about this second law? You think gods are sorcerers who deliberately take different forms at different times, sometimes by changing on their own and altering their own form into a larger number of shapes, sometimes deceiving us into thinking they have done so? Or are they simple beings, and least of all likely to abandon their own form? Yeah, that's a great question. There are a lot of Greek myths about like, oh, Zeus turned into an ox, or turned into a bull, and just showed up on the beach. Adeimantus. I can't say offhand. Socrates. Well, if something abandons its own form, mustn't it either cause the change itself or be changed by something else? If something abandons its own form, yeah, something must change it, I guess. Yeah, what is the nature of becoming? Hegel. It must. Now, okay, so if you're going to change, either you change yourself or somebody changes you. Now, the best things are least liable to alteration or change, aren't they? That's a leap. For example, a body is altered by food, drink, and labors, and all plants by sun, winds, and other similar affections. But the healthiest and strongest is least altered. Isn't that so? Of course. Okay, the best things are least altered. Why not? Maybe the best things know how to adapt. And wouldn't a soul that is most courageous and most knowledgeable be least disturbed or altered by any outside influence? It's Sounds about right. Yes. Socrates. And the same account surely also applies even to manufactured items, such as implements, houses, and clothes. Those that are good and well made are least altered by time or any other influences. Yeah, like iPhones. That's right. So whatever's in good condition, whether due to nature or craft or both, is least subject to change by something else. Yeah, okay. It seems so. Where are you going with this? But gods, of course, as well as the things belonging to them, are best in every way. The gods are unchanging, I guess. They certainly are. So in this view, gods would be least likely to have many forms. This is such a stupid argument. Like, oh yeah, the best things never change. The best, like, hammer doesn't rust. So why would Zeus turn into a bull? Huh? That doesn't make any sense. Least likely indeed. Then would they change or alter themselves? Clearly so, if indeed they are altered at all. Do they change themselves into something better and more beautiful, or into something worse and uglier than themselves? Better and more beautiful. I guess this is a big concept up till the 20th century, is relating aesthetics to morality, or at least to goodness. It's like good and beautiful. They go hand in hand. You can't have a beautiful serial killer. Adeimantus. It would have to be into something worse if indeed they are altered at all. For surely we won't say the gods are deficient in either beauty or virtue. Adeimantus, what happened to you, man? You were on my side here. Now he just suddenly knows all about the nature of the gods. Socrates, you're absolutely right. Do you think, Adeimantus, that anyone, whether god or human, would deliberately make himself worse in any way? Whether god or human. No, I think some people make themselves worse. Self-destruction. No, that is impossible. You need to meet more people. It is also impossible, then, for a god to want to alter himself. yeah. Gonna get some gauges, some tats. On the contrary, since each god is, it seems, as beautiful and as good as possible, he must always unqualifiedly retain his own form. In my view, at least, that is absolutely necessary. Okay. Socrates, he was right that this was going to be a long journey. None of our poets, then, my very good man, is to say that the gods, like strangers from foreign lands, assume many disguises when they visit our cities. Yeah, stop saying that, you poets. It's like the god is the secret shopper. Nor must they tell lies about Proteus and Thetis, or present Hera in their tragedies or other poems disguised as a priestess collecting alms for the life-giving sons of the Argive river Inachus, or tell us any of the many other such lies. Socrates is so mad about what the poets are saying. It's like, all right. It's like, no more stories about this, okay? I'm sick of this. In the ideal city, we do not have another story about a broke person living in Brooklyn. Like, I'm tired of this stuff. Come up with something else. Nor should mothers, influenced by these stories, which terrify children, tell bad tales about gods who go wandering around at night in the guises of many strange and multifarious beings, lest they blaspheme the gods, and at the same time, make their children too cowardly. Yeah, they really should tell kids more stories like that. Gods changing forms, wandering around in the night. Adeimantus. Indeed, they should not. Socrates. But, though the gods themselves are the sorts of things that cannot change, they make us think that they appear in multifarious guises, deceiving us and using sorcery on us. Do they make us think that? Okay, now we're finally getting back, once again, to the difference between perception and reality. This time with, like, the gods are unchanging, but maybe they try to fool us. What? Would a god be willing to lie by presenting in word or deed what is only an illusion? Adeimantus. This seems like a very key moment as well. Do the gods lie to us? I don't know. Don't you know that all gods and humans hate a true lie, if one may call it that? Okay, here it comes. This I think we're coming up to a key passage in the whole book. What do you mean? I mean that no one intentionally wants to lie about the most important things to what is most important in himself. On the contrary, he fears to hold a lie there more than anything. No one wants to lie about the most important things to what is most important in himself. Know yourself. I still don't understand. That's because you think I'm saying something deep. Socrates, you make me laugh. I simply mean that to lie and to have lied to the soul about the things that are, and to be ignorant, and to have and hold a lie there is what everyone would least of all accept. Indeed, they especially hate it there. Yeah, people want to believe the truth about themselves. I'll go along with that. I'm going to read note 28 here. Glossary of terms, not going to do that. Okay. They certainly do. Okay, we all hate lies about ourselves. And again, he's just like, well, that's human nature, so the gods hate that too, right? Like, I don't know. Where are you coming up with all this? But surely, as I was saying just now, it would be most correct to say that it is truly speaking a lie. The ignorance in the soul of the one to whom the lie was told. For a lie in words is a sort of imitation of this affection in the soul, an image of it that comes into being after it, and not an altogether pure lie. Isn't that so? So what is this? Okay, I don't understand what this pure lie is. Surely it would be most correct to say it is truly speaking a lie. Okay, so you have a lie in your heart. A lie in words is sort of imitation of this affection in the soul. So you believe something false, you say it, and that's not a pure lie, because that's like you believed it. So yes, it is. A real lie, then, is hated not only by the gods, but also by human beings. So I guess that's something you intentionally say? I'm not entirely sure. Adeimantus. I think it is. Or that's like a lie, a belief lie. I don't know. I wish there were a note on this. What about a lie in words? Aren't there times when it is useful, and so does not merit hatred? Here it comes. Here it is. Right here, folks. One of the most important passages in all of political philosophy is coming your way. I feel it. It's like when you're walking around certain neighborhoods, you're like, I feel like there's just going to be an Apple store near here. This is too cool. There's too many chic places. And then 2 blocks later, there's an Apple store. What about when we are dealing with enemies, or with so-called friends who, because of insanity or ignorance, are attempting to do something bad? Sort of like the very beginning, we had the debt to repay to your friend. You borrow his weapon, he goes crazy. Don't give him the weapon back. Isn't it a useful drug for preventing them? And consider the case of those stories we were talking about just now. Those we tell because we do not know the truth about those ancient events. By making the lies that they contain as much like the truth as possible, don't we make them useful? Those we tell because we do not know the truth about those ancient events. Okay, so it's talking about the fall of Troy, or he started out by talking about the allegories we tell to children. These are kind of useful lies before they're ready for the truth, but they're useful, right? They contain elements of truth. We most certainly do. In which of these ways, then, could a lie be useful to a god? Would he lie by making likenesses of the truth about ancient events because of his ignorance of them? Yeah. No. It would be ridiculous to think that, says Adeimantus. Then there's nothing of the lying poet in a god. Not in my view. Okay, so poets lie just because they're like, I don't know what happened. Just make something up. And the god I don't know. I guess he's going to lie, and we'll find out why. Would he lie, then, through fear of his enemies? Hardly. Because of the foolishness or insanity of his family or friends, then? Yeah, why is this person gonna... Or why is the god gonna lie? We lie to our insane brother. No one who is foolish or mad is a friend of the gods. So a god has no reason to lie. None. So both what is demonic and what is divine are entirely free of lies. Demonic. Glossier terms. Demon, incidentally, I'm not going to try to get into defining it. I think it's sort of like a spirit. Comes up a lot in Frankenstein. Check it out sometime. Check out the channel playlist. One of my faves. Adeimantus, absolutely. Socrates, a god, then, is altogether simple, true in both word and deed. He does not change himself or deceive others by means of images, by words, or by sending signs, whether they are awake or dreaming. Adeimantus, that is my view. At any rate, now that I have heard what you have to say. So the other thing, just thinking about kind of Adeimantus's change of heart here from going like, we don't know anything about the gods, to like, yeah, Socrates, that is what the gods are like. Thinking back to those secret societies and political clubs, he mentioned the being very well trained in oration so that you can persuade groups of people. And it seems like, I don't know, maybe Socrates is a Freemason here who is trained in these persuasive arts, and that's kind of how he pulls Adeimantus over to his side. Not with reason. Socrates, you agree then that this is the second pattern people must follow when speaking or composing poems about the gods. The gods are not sorcerers who change themselves, nor do they mislead us by telling lies in word or deed. Okay. Yeah, those gods never tell a lie. Like George Washington. I agree. Even though we praise many things in Homer, then, we won't approve of Zeus sending the dream to Agamemnon, nor of Aeschylus when he makes Thetis say that Apollo sang in prophecy at her wedding about the good luck my children would have, free of disease throughout their long lives, and of all the blessings the friendship of the gods would bring me. I hoped that Phoebus' divine mouth would be free of lies, endowed as it is with the craft of prophecy, but the very god who sang the one at the feast, the one who said all that, he himself it is, who killed my son. Yeah, don't let him say that. Whenever anyone says such things about a god, we will be angry with him, refuse him a chorus, and not allow teachers to use what he says for the education of the young. Yeah, this is like North Korea. None of our guardians are to be as God-fearing and godlike as human beings can. Not if our guardians are going to be as God-fearing and God-like. So here it is. The guardians must be both God-fearing and God-like. So it seems like the guardians live in fear of the gods, and then I think the people live in fear of the guardians. Or they must have these kind of godlike myths about the guardians, just because that's what people do. We'll see where he goes. Adeimantus, I agree completely about those patterns, and I would use them as laws. Dun. End of book 2. There it is, folks. Wah wah wee wah. Okay, so we've got some meat here. This isn't... I thought there was like a really famous passage coming up, but I think it's coming up in a later part of the book. But we're already talking about the nature of lies and how they can be good and useful, but we can't have people believing that the gods tell them lies. So that's kind of the ultimate lie, is that like your gods are lying to you, but you're not allowed to believe that. And so we have to stamp out any possible belief that the gods might be doing that, or the gods are imperfect in any way. So this is kind of the least reasoned part of the book so far. he's just kind of making up qualities of gods and being like, oh, well, they must be the best. Oh, well, the best things don't change, so therefore they must be changing themselves when they feel like it. But we're not going to tell people that. So we have gods not allowed to say that they are the cause of bad things, not allowed to say that they lie. We've got this whole, basically a new mythology. So he's criticizing all these other poets who have said things like, well, the gods do this and gods do that. He's saying, no, we can't have that. We can't have people believing that. Because we need, the ultimate rationale here is that this last part is, and kind of looping it back, not all the way, which I'll talk about in just a second, but it started out talking about the guardians and how the guardians need to be gentle, spirited, and philosophical. And he's like, yeah, it's just going to be hard to find that in people. But if we give them stories about these good gods, and we tell them, not only do you need to fear the god, you need to be like the god, then we can kind of train these guardians to have the qualities that we need for them to be good protectors of the city. And yeah, again, it's not, these aren't just professional soldiers. They're like also making, they're also making the rules, and I guess part of that is kind of loops back to Thrasymachus' argument that what is just is what is advantageous to the stronger. These guardians are the strong ones, and so they're kind of making, because they're the soldiers, they are making the rules. So Socrates seems to be putting someone else. He's kind of putting someone else ahead of the guardians. So it's not like, it's not just like a elected republic here where you say, okay, the soldiers work for the government's elected by the people, everything's happy. It's like, no, the guardians sort of work for the gods, and the gods are an invention not even of the poets, but it's like the philosopher sets the rules for what the poets are allowed to say about the gods. The guardians believe these myths about the gods, and then everybody else kind of lives in fear of these guardians. So that we already have this sort of hierarchy with it looks like with this philosopher at the top. Like he's really the one making all the rules here. Based on how unreasoned this part is, it very much seems to me like these are just the lie, part of the lies that he feels like he needs to tell the rest of society. This is sort of the storybook account of reality that Adeimantus is willing to go along with, even though Socrates probably doesn't actually believe that it's true. He's really just started talking about all these supposedly necessary quality of the gods, and whereas before the most compelling thing I heard about the gods was again from Adeimantus is we don't know anything about these guys. So this looks to me like we're getting the beginnings of what I think will be referred to as a magnificent myth or noble lie later in the book. It's just one of the most famous concepts from the Republic. That there's something that people need to believe in order to keep society together. This would, with that in place, it kind of fills some missing pieces from before. So you remember I was saying I think that sort of the most powerful combination would be kind of justice on the inside, injustice on the outside. And you have this sort of, this noble lie helps make that happen. If you think kind of the gods are on your side, then you can do whatever you want to other people and expand your empire. And there's just going to be basically no stopping you at that point. So you got kind of survival on the fittest on the outside, and then oh yeah, we're all just buddies here on the inside. And curious how. Okay, yeah. So I said I was going to kind of loop this back. The circle isn't really closed here yet because Socrates, you remember, he started out by saying that we're going to examine the nature of justice at the individual level, but first let's talk about the societal level. And Adiamant is like, all right, fine, I don't know where this is going, but sure. We haven't really gotten back to the nature of the individual or the just individual yet, and this almost sort of seems like a sideshow in some ways, but maybe it's not. I mean, we'll see how it all gets tied together. It is interesting that philosophy, kind of the nature of truth, etc., in this book are predicated on how society is organized, just because we are social and political animals. But I really just want to see how this ties back to how it's to sort of the just person, the just life. Is there really a defense of being just at the individual level? And we just have not received that yet from good old Socrates, but he knows how to, Socrates plays the long game here. He's starts laying these traps, and you just follow along, and then don't really know where he's going, and then when it's too late, you're like, ah, man, you got me once again. Okay, so that is the end of book 2 here. Curious to see where it goes, with the arguments just really not complete. So it's a good little cliffhanger, with Adiamantus agreeing with these patterns and having the Guardians in this hypothetical city, this little level of SimCity 2000, being godlike and having these heavily regulated myths about gods. All right, so hope you're enjoying it. Hope you join us for book 3. Hit the old subscribe button to make sure it shows up in your subscriptions feed, something like that. Hit the like-a-roo, and I will see you tomorrow.